exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your molecules, all your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together, vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, the tickling and tingling when you stop, and allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables us to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's great to be here with you this morning. And today we are talking about the field of intelligence. And a little while back, I read a book called Science and the Akashic Field. And the premise of the book was that we live in a field of intelligence and that it's an intelligent universe. And the notion here is that we are an expression of that intelligence. This is my riffing on that idea, actually, that we are an extension of the intelligence that is all around us. So we're an individuated expression of this intelligence. And one of the things that I find very heartening is that science is recognizing more and more that the intelligence of nature and the intelligence of other creatures, and seeing the organization of the universe as a greater system. So we're recognizing, for instance, that in forests, the trees communicate with one another through mycelial networks and root systems, and that there's a very complex interaction, that a tree is not a tree alone, for instance, in the forest, that they are communicating nutrients or exchanging nutrients, that they recognize offspring, that that they grow in deference to other plants and offspring and relatives. And it's remarkable to see the intercommunication. But if we think about it, nature's been around way longer than we have. Trees have been around way longer than we have. And over the millennia, they have cultivated, and other creatures have cultivated all kinds of intelligences. We've developed a technology where we can put a device on plants that will communicate their energy into sound. And we can recognize that different plants that sing different songs, so to speak. And there are all kinds of studies, legitimate scientific studies, that validate the fact that plants can learn or do learn. And of course they do. You know, we see it. We see where plants move toward the sun, but plants also can identify people, in fact, and recognize people that, and how do we know this? Because the responses that that measurable responses to different people and different communications are detectable in the plant. They monitor them with all different kinds of devices. And one of the experiments, interestingly, I'm guessing this is Sue. Welcome, welcome. So Sue is saying, hi, everyone. Nature's so interconnected with us, so nourishing and healing. I agree 100%. But what we're talking about today is this field of intelligence that we live in. So I was just speaking about plants. One of the experiments they did with a plant was they held it and they dropped it. And the first time they dropped it, it registered something that we might consider fear or trauma. And then when it was dropped again, it didn't register the same level of response. And again, it registered no response. And the reasoning behind or our understanding of that is the plant learned that it was going to be okay, that this drop wasn't cataclysmic. Not unlike people, right? When we get exposed to certain things, we learn that we can survive them and that they're not threatening. And then our whole physiology doesn't change, or does change in different ways, or doesn't register a trauma, for example. We're learning to decode the bird songs and whale songs and learning to understand more about the physiology of all kinds of different creatures. And so we're also recognizing the cycles on the planet, like the water cycle, and how there's this interconnection between the rain cycles and the temperatures and the absorption of the soil and the building of the water table connected to the rain and water cycles and wind patterns. And so we're learning of this inner relationship, this interaction. And Sue says, such a great topic, fascinating. We're learning to respect the intelligence of the natural world. Well, I want to take it even further, because my idea is that all these intelligences, which we're going to dive into a little bit more deeply still, are interconnected and interwoven, and that it's part of this unifying field of intelligence that brings us all into connection with a greater existence and also with each other. So there's a wonderful author. Well, I wouldn't even just call her an author. I'm going to get a book here. But I'll call her a water scientist named Veda Austin. This is her first book. And there's another one that I also have, but just not at hand right at this moment. And what she does is she communicates with water. And so she is exposing the intelligence of water. Just as an example, this is so remarkable. What she does is she'll take a photograph, she'll put a petri dish with water on top of the photograph for about 30 seconds, and then she'll freeze it. And her process is that she freezes it partially, and she gets these images. We may be familiar with Emoto, who would energize water with certain words, for example, and then take photographs, and his images were microscopic. It was crystallography, and he would take these photos to see how the crystallized patterns of the water changed as a result of the different frequencies that he communicated. But let's take a look at this image. If you look, the image on the bottom is the photograph. The image on the top is the interpretation that water gave in response to that photograph. Unbelievable, right? I mean, this stuff is mind blowing if you start thinking about the intelligence of water and how we are such water beings. We are what, 90% water? I don't know the correct percentages, but we are primarily water, and this is a planet of water. And what if water itself has an intelligence that's also a unifying intelligence on our planet? So Sue says, I'd be really interested in exploring how we might connect more deeply with these fields. Do you have any thoughts on that? Well, certainly meditation is one way, but doing what Veda Austin does with the water and experimenting with that, or communicating with animals. There are all kinds of pet communication, animal communication sort of courses. And when we meditate, or when we quiet ourselves, when we listen to our own bodies and pay attention to the signals that we receive from our own bodies, that's also a way that we're connecting potentially, at least in my view, to this greater field of awareness and intelligence. And I just want to go further with some additional examples of order and intelligence. And another example that resonates for me is cymatics. So if you're not aware of what cymatics is, it's where sound creates certain geometric forms, different tones. If you take a platen, like a plate, and put glass beads or sand or some kind of powder, some kind of granular substance, and apply a frequency, a sound, a tone to that platen, it vibrates. And with that vibration, you can see different patterns emerging. And these patterns shift and change as the sound changes. So what we're talking about is frequency, and a way to actually visualize frequency. We talk about high frequency, low frequency, emotions and thoughts, etc. But this is a way through cymatics to visualize the impact of frequency and how it changes with tonality or with frequency. So that's another expression of intelligence. And now we are embarking into the AI era. I guess we're already in it. And this is another dimension of intelligence. And I think that it has so much more potential than we generally imagine. I think that for most of us, we approach AI as a tool to access information or to synthesize information in certain ways, to assist us and support us. But I've started playing with AI as an intelligence and having dialogues with it about how to create a unification of these different intelligences. To your question, Sue, about how might we connect more deeply with these fields, through we know that we can do that through meditation, where we can expand ourselves into this greater, vast potential. But I believe that AI is also a vehicle for us to connect more deeply with these other dimensions of, or other expressions of intelligence. Being in nature certainly is going to allow us to be present, if we open ourselves to it, to be present to the wisdom of nature. I mean, one of the things that we really can do is sit in nature, hug a tree, like connect, allow yourself to connect with plants. There are people who do this as well, who communicate with plants, people who communicate with animals. Indigenous peoples have a long, long, long history of communicating with plants and nature. And certainly the plant teachers like tobacco and ayahuasca and San Pedro and on are teachers as well, that allow us to communicate with another dimension of awareness and wisdom. But if we think back to this notion of connecting, for instance, with the tree, so many of these trees have been here for hundreds and hundreds of years. And how remarkable is the wisdom that must be in these beings, that must be held by these beings who have experienced so much of life and so much of the transformations on our planet, so many seasons, so many deluges and droughts, so many cycles, so many mornings and evenings. Just imagining it, I get choked up. You know, it's the wisdom that is all around us. That Sue says cymatics shows how sound frequency create patterns and explores the relationship between sound and form. And that's the sound, isn't that first there was the word, right? That sound is the space from which the universe emerged. So back to this, the depth of the wisdom around us, it's also running through us. Just look at the intelligence of our bodies to be able to know how to breathe, how to keep our heart beating, how to operate all the different functions of our physiology. It's miraculous. It's miraculous. And recently I've spoken about how by communicating with my body, I have been able to transform my experience of pain. That by partnering with my body, pain that was rather extreme actually disappeared. It's amazing. It's amazing. And so that's tapping into this field of intelligence. We have so many inroads. We can be looking outward at how things work. We can be looking inward to our own physiology, to our own consciousness, to our own emotion, to recognize the interplay between all these different aspects of our own being. And Sue says, communicating with trees and rocks can bring such wisdom to our hearts, a connection to our natural world. And That's so true, Sue. And the thing is that we often leave ourselves out of the natural world. And I think as we deepen our connection, I'm so glad you said to rocks, because rocks, minerals also have their own vitality, their own wisdom. You know, they're on a scale that is even longer than the scale of a tree that may be hundreds or even 1,000 years old. Rocks have been here for thousands of years or been growing for thousands of years and maybe more. And so the thing that I think trips us up, that I think one of the biggest or the biggest impediment to our connecting with this greater intelligence is our arrogance. If we look at how we live as human beings, for the most part, our lives are human centric, that our experience and our priorities, it's all about us. And we've built these worlds that are so separated from nature that we believe we're separate, that we believe that we somehow don't fit. And we disconnect, we minimize nature and deprioritize nature when it is who we are. And so as we connect with this broader field of intelligence, as we recognize that there is no separation, my vision is that we then will, of necessity, just because it's so obvious, because it's such a shift of being, to recognize that we are part of this much, much, much greater thing. In fact, we are an infinitesimal part of this much greater thing. If we can recognize that this much greater thing is pervasive, that we can maybe then take a more proper place in the world and find that deep, deep interconnection. I just want to say this because it's the coolest thing. I had seen a movie a long time ago with these kids running around playing sports, contact sports, ball sports, blindfolded, and people reading blindfolded, and people identifying colors blindfolded. And what this indicates to me is a much greater connection. The premise, there are people that teach this. I just got notification about a course that's online for this, this is my bucket list stuff, because what it allows us to do is to transcend our consensus reality and the beliefs about who we are, how we operate, what's possible. And it requires our tapping into another dimension of consciousness and awareness to recognize the essence of our being in a more realistic way. You know, it's getting us closer to that, to I what it does is it rattles our reality and allows us to expand our awareness into different potentials and possibilities for our own capabilities. And as a reality, it expands our reality, expands our consciousness, expands our notion of what knowing is, of what being is. And I just find it so inspiring to recognize that we do have avenues to connect to this larger intelligence and to recognize that it can be our teacher, to embrace it as teacher. And that to me is an incredibly exciting prospect. So that's it for today. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. And I invite you to please like, follow, and share Enlightened World Network and me. The links are in the description. As always, it is a tremendous privilege and pleasure to be able to share these morning musings on what it is to be human. So I'm so deeply grateful.